Today, negotiators from Hamas and Israel have arrived in Sharm El-Sheikh in Egypt to discuss Donald Trump's peace plan to end the Israel-Gaza war. Will it work? And another French Prime Minister resigns. Where does this leave the country's president, Emmanuel Macron? We'll discuss on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. First of all, we're going to talk about the negotiations that are getting underway right now as we record this episode in Sharm El-Sheikh in Egypt between representatives of the Israeli government and representatives of Hamas. Although they're not talking directly, this is another one of those talks where it's mediated between the two of them and they're not in the same room. And the focus of these talks is the peace plan that Donald Trump issued a couple of weeks ago. And that involves lots and lots of different categories of issues. But the main one that both sides seem to be reaching agreement on is the imminent release of the remaining Israeli hostages and the exchange of Palestinian prisoners who are being held in Israel in return. So there's quite a lot to get our heads around, but actually I think it's worth doing because this is going to be so huge this week, especially if it goes the way lots of diplomats sort of sense maybe it is going. So the person who's going to help us understand it all, of course, is Chief International Correspondent Lyse Doucet, who joins me from Tel Aviv. Hi, Lyse.
Sorry not to be with you in this studio, Adam, but I'm joining you here from a very evocative place, a very emotional place, Hostages Square, right in the heart of the Israeli city of Tel Aviv.
And we'll talk about the negotiations in a second, but I'm just thinking of the significance of where you are right now and also the week that it is and the date that it is.
Yes, it really strikes you when you come into the square. I'm just looking around as I did, and there's this huge clock, Adam, and it's 730 days, 12 minutes, 45 seconds. That's how long the hostages have been in captivity. So when I came into the square, the first thing I thought was, and I mustn't be the only one, when is that clock going to come to a stop? Because all of the hostages have come home. I have to say that this is the moment of the greatest optimism, cautious optimism, but the greatest hope that this could be the week during the Jewish festival of Sukkot that the hostages could come home, and if it's not this week, shortly afterwards. But such is the nature of this war that there is also a risk that it could all unravel. But as we speak, those talks are getting underway in the Egyptian city of Sharm El-Sheikh, Red Sea city.
Yeah, and we're recording this bit of this episode of Newscast at 4:15 on Monday UK time. And just over the last couple of hours, the delegations have been flying into that Egyptian city that you mentioned there, Lyse. Just in terms of the process, is this another round of those indirect negotiations where Israel and Hamas are kind of in different rooms and the mediators are shuttling between them and refining the proposals as they go?
Yes, indirect talks, proximity talks. Of course, there are no direct talks between Israel and Hamas, so messages are passed between the mediators. What is significant about this round, Adam, is that there have been many rounds of talks when the Israeli delegation wasn't sufficiently high level. It didn't have the power to really negotiate. It came with messages, it listened, and then it came back to Israel. This time, the Israeli delegation, which we understand has now arrived in Sharm El-Sheikh, is headed by Ron Dermer, who's the Strategic Affairs Minister and a very close confidant of Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that really matters. Interesting, there is a huge Hamas delegation as well, and the Hamas delegation is led by Khalil al-Hayya, and he was the target of that assassination attempt by Israel when they fired into the Qatari capital Doha in an attempt to assassinate senior members of Hamas. So there they are in the same city, sitting down for these proximity negotiations. There's the Qatari mediators are there, the Egyptian mediators. And we understand, at least the last report, was that the American negotiators, President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who seems to be playing an increasingly important role on the Mideast front, just like he did in President Trump's first term, he's also expected to arrive on Wednesday. Now, whether that's because they've said, okay, right, let's get the Arab mediators, let's let them get through the details, and then we'll arrive when we think there's a deal to clinch. But so it seems to be a phase process.
I can see why that the cast list and the choreography is making people feel so hopeful this time round. What's a way of thinking about what the basis of these negotiations or indirect talks actually are? Because I see a lot of people saying, oh, Donald Trump's 20-point plan from a few days ago, some people say it's got 21 points, it is the basis of it. Is that a useful way of thinking about it? Is that the blueprint we're talking about here?
Well, let me begin by saying that the most significant difference in this round of talks is that President Trump is now fully focused on these negotiations. He is, for the first time, if you looked at the White House account, they are posting photographs of this square where I am now. Right now it's quiet because the Jewish Festival of Sukkot is getting underway this evening. But President Trump posted a photograph where this square was jammed packed. The people spilled out into the streets beyond, and there was a big flag in the middle, and it said now or never. President Trump tweeted that, and that was to say, I am with you. I am going to get those hostages home. And he has said he wants it to happen in a few days. In that 20-point plan, which you mentioned, which I have to emphasize, isn't a detailed blueprint to get to somewhere that you could call peace. That is way down. But it's a set of vague principles, if you like, that should govern the next steps. But he said in that one of the few details which was included was that once Israel and Hamas agree to this 20-point plan, that the hostages should come home within 72 hours, and of course exchange for 250 Palestinians, most of them convicted of killing Israelis, as well as more than 1,000 who'd been arrested during the Gaza war. But Prime Minister Netanyahu said he wants this all done before the end of the Sukkot holiday, so that would be by the end of next week. Again, there's cautious hope. So that is one of the main differences. The last time there was this hope, which was just before he came into office, where before he even returned to the White House, he sent his administration, you had the Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration negotiating together with the Israelis and Hamas, and it resulted in the ceasefire deal, which had begun on January the 19th, and which Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu then pulled out of in March. This is the second very serious effort.
So in terms of the Trump plan, which kind of is and also isn't the basis of the negotiations, let's drill down into some of the elements, at least that were in that. So you mentioned the hostage release. Where do you think we've got to on releasing the hostages and exchanging them for Palestinian prisoners? Is that, are both sides almost signed on the dotted line as far as that's concerned?
In the statements which were released both by Hamas and by Israel, both very carefully crafted. Nobody, not even Hamas, wants to be seen to say no to President Trump, especially not now. So they focused on what they agree on in that 20-point plan. For Hamas, that was the release, and it's a huge concession by Hamas to say we're going to release all of the prisoners, living and dead. That's about 48 people. 20 are believed to be alive. Prime Minister Netanyahu also said we will work with President Trump on what he called the first phase of this 20-point plan. When you get beyond that, there's huge disagreements which could yet break this whole process down. But for now, the focus is on these hostages and prisoners. Just before I joined you, I checked with Israeli colleagues. They are discussing the list of 25 Palestinian prisoners. Very difficult for Israel to release some of them because it's very controversial. As Israel would say, they have blood on their hands. And Hamas, we've been told, are now trying to search for the hostages which are in their hands or in the hands of Islamic Jihad. They have cautioned it may be difficult to find all the remains immediately. Some of them will have been buried in areas now under Israeli military control. Some of them may be under mounds and mounds of rubble. But it seems they can find the 20 living hostages to at least get the process started. So that seems to be underway, Adam, and we'll wait and see how soon we'll get an announcement about when that process can start. The question we're asking is, President Trump put out this vague map, which would be the temporary withdrawal line for Israeli forces. Hamas doesn't accept that map because it still puts Israeli forces in control of the majority of the land of the Gaza Strip, and it means some 900,000 Palestinians can't return home. How much of a stumbling block is this going to be? They've been talking about these details in recent days as well. So let's see how quickly they can advance.
And what about this idea of a new kind of government for Gaza, a new administration that wouldn't have Hamas as playing a part of it? Where are the two sides on that?
Okay, so then the next step is going to be, of course, a ceasefire. And there are members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's cabinet, mostly the far right-wing ministers, who have kept saying, no, you've got to keep negotiating under fire. You've got to keep the war going. Prime Minister Netanyahu finds himself now caught between President Trump on one side and his right-wing ministers on the other, seems to understand he's just got to say yes for now to President Trump. So hopefully there will be a ceasefire, and Hamas, of course, says they can't, unless there is a ceasefire, they won't be able to go and locate and bring all the hostages out without them fearing that they themselves could come under Israeli attack. Then the issue comes, well, who's going to run Gaza? And Hamas has accepted that it will be technocrats. Who will choose the technocrats? Will some of them have some vague relationship to the Palestinian Authority or to Hamas? Those efforts must already have been underway for some time to locate technical people who can actually run an area which, let's be clear, Gaza now lies in utter ruin. We're already hearing reports of bulldozers going in, starting to clear the rubble. This is a task of reconstruction, of providing essentials for Gazans who've been living with so little for so long. And of course, there's the aid that's supposed to start coming in at much greater scale and pace. So the technocrats will be put in charge, working with the international community. Then after that, it gets more difficult and dangerous.
And is there any sign that Hamas is willing to give up their arms and their armed struggle? Because that was another big part of Donald Trump's plan, and a part that lots of observers said, well, Hamas could never sign up to, because that would be Hamas kind of giving up on its entire existence.
So Hamas is supposed to give up the guns, give up the power, and also get up and go. They're supposed to go into exile. President Trump was asked such as the world we live in, he did an interview with CNN, which was by texts on telephone, in which he was asked, well, what if the Hamas doesn't leave? And he responded, as he often does, complete obliteration, it was said. Those discussions are ongoing. There's not any clear indication. We do know they don't want to give up their guns. So there seems to be a discussion, well, what if you distinguish between heavy weapons and smaller arms? Because during this 2 years of war, Hamas is not just in a battle with Israel, it's also more in a battle with these other tribes and clans and mafia groups, some of which Israel has admitted it's backing some of them. There's been clashes recently, so it's got its own personal protection to think about. So these are really big issues. But I have to say, I was in New York last week. That was the week where President Trump had a meeting which is now being described as a turning point when he met with Arab and Islamic leaders, including his key Gulf allies, to talk about the Gaza war. And afterwards, speaking to several of the foreign ministers, they said, listen, let's just end the war, get the hostages home, get the prisoners out. Let's start there, and then we'll get on to the more difficult issues. Because you may remember, Adam, that when Prime Minister Netanyahu was standing right next to President Trump, when President Trump revealed this 20-point plan, when Prime Minister Netanyahu came out of it, he was interviewed by Israeli media, and he said, one, there will never be a Palestinian state, and two, our Israeli forces are going to continue to occupy some part of the Gaza Strip.
But Lyse, what you're doing, I mean, it's always amazing to chat to you, but what you're doing amazingly today is taking the big kind of titanic struggle that is going on in the region and also linking it to the fact that there's just some very detailed, processy negotiations that are quite sort of practical going on as well. Like both those things exist at the same time, like the big stuff and the kind of the detail stuff.
President Trump, as it's often been said, doesn't get involved in the details. The details don't interest him. When he talks about being the deal maker, being the peacemaker. He says, stop the fighting, bring the hostages home. And he wants things to happen quickly. That's why he makes these ultimatums in capital letters. And that is why, much to the surprise and anger of Israeli leaders, most of all Prime Minister Netanyahu, I think, was quite stunned to see that when Hamas put out this yes, but statement, which was carefully crafted, no doubt under huge pressure by the Qataris and the Egyptians, no doubt crafted with input from them, only focusing on the points where it agreed with President Trump, as we've been saying, the release of the hostages, a technocratic government, ignoring or sidestepping all the rest. Within an hour, President Trump was in the White House, but the cameras are being set up. Hamas is interested in peace, President Trump said. Just saying, right, let's go. Everyone's interested in peace. We're going to go and get peace. Peace, we're not talking peace now. We're talking ceasefire, hostage release and exchange for Palestinian prisoners, the beginning of what are likely to be very difficult, drawn-out talks about the future of Gaza. But the most important thing, Adam, is that after 2 years of this grievous war, of this intense, unprecedented suffering of Palestinians, of the agony of the hostage families, that this situation is ever closer to ending this chapter and beginning another. And that is what matters now.
Well, Lyse, thank you very much for your analysis. And I'm just thinking back actually to the last time we were probably sat in this studio, which was when we were with our colleague Jane Corbin doing that episode of Old Newscast about the Oslo Accords being kind of handshakes agreed on the lawn of the White House back in the early 90s. Are there any parallels with that moment? Because that seemed like a really hopeful moment where it felt like there was going to be a leap forward towards a more peaceful situation. And of course, it's a completely different situation now, but I'm just wondering if there's any kind of similar vibes this time round. And I hope that's not a sort of offensive way of putting it.
It's a really, really great question, Adam. But let us say that so many years on from that absolutely extraordinary moment on the White House lawn where Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, after a moment's hesitation, old warriors and arch enemies shaking hands for peace, and lit the fire of people, Israelis and Palestinians daring to hope they could live together. Israel is a very different country now. All too much has happened. The Palestinian society is a very different society. The world knows all too much about the dangers of peacemaking and about war breaking out. I think people are much more pragmatic now, and right now it's just step by step away from war and towards peace. But it will be a very long and very, very rocky road.
Lyse, thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam.
Now, as promised, Sébastien Lecornu, did you know who he was? Had you got used to the fact that he was the French Prime Minister? Well, this morning, on Monday, he resigned, having only been in the role for about 3 weeks, which means he's about sort of a third of a Michel Barnier. But it is continuing the trend of French Prime Ministers not lasting very long. In fact, it's accelerating the trend of French Prime Ministers not lasting very long. Let's find out what is going on and what this means, well, for French politics in general and the presidency of Emmanuel Macron. I'm pleased to say I'm joined here in the studio by my new colleague. He's the host of the Global Story podcast, which you can get every day on BBC Sounds. It's Tristan Redman. Hello, Tristan.
Thank you for having me.
No, thanks for coming in. And also, it's great because you are now on tap as a French political and cultural expert.
I would be thrilled. I'd be delighted.
And is that because you lived and worked in France for a long or you are French?
I've lived I am French. Right. You can't tell from my accent.
No.
But I've lived most of my life in France and I reported from Paris for 20 years or so.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. Happy to come and help.
Great.
Anytime.
Well, the global story's lost because you now can't work on it right now is our gain. But I'm sure you'll be doing an episode of this later on. Also joining us again is Marion Solletty, who is Politico's editor-at-large in France. Hello, Marion.
Hello, how are you two?
Just explain where you are right now.
I'm right outside the buildings of the National Assembly in Paris, where National Rally MPs are holding a meeting right now with Marine Le Pen on their next steps and, what are the next day going to look like.
Marion, did you see Marine Le Pen arriving with her cat?
Yes, I saw the cat actually. It's an adorable kitten. It's like brown and black, and it's really, really small. It was in his travel cage
And
this
what,
morning.
Tristan, what's the deal with the cat?
I don't totally know, but Marion, is it because it's a kitten that needs feeding and so she takes it everywhere or something?
Yeah, that's my understanding. I mean, Marine Le Pen has been a long-time cat lover. She has several cats, and this one is really, really small, and so she's reportedly carrying it everywhere to feed it during the day.
Tristan, just explain to us then, Sébastien Lecornu, so the latest prime minister to go, just how long had he been in post and what had he been trying to achieve in that time?
3 weeks he's been in post. And there was a big question about whether or not he would actually find anyone, 18 names, to agree to be in his government. And he really struggled. It's taken him 3 weeks. And I mean, so he was appointed by Emmanuel Macron after François Bayrou, the previous prime minister, was voted out in a vote of no confidence 3 weeks ago. And so Lecornu had to find a government and then get them installed and then get a budget passed by the end of the year. And on Sunday night, he named his 18 people. And then things very quickly started to fall apart when it appeared that some of the people who were named were not very happy, actually, about having been named under the conditions that they were nominated in. And then I was shocked this morning, very early, to find out that he had already resigned. So I feel like probably less than 12 hours after he nominated the government. So now France is in huge turmoil again.
And so, Marion, why did this happen all so swiftly?
Yeah, it was quite the unraveling. So the thing that really kind of made everything fall apart was the presence in the government of Bruno Le Maire, who was a former economy minister and who has been kind of blamed by the Conservatives, who are allied with Macron in the outgoing government, for the current public finance crisis. He was called back as defense minister, and that infuriated the heavyweight, the Conservative in the government. And have threatened to pull out. And so Lecornu, in a way, kind of, preempted their move by resigning.
Oh, that's interesting. So, Tristan, it was more of a kind of personnel issue rather than like budget policy issue, which is what's been the downfall of the previous prime ministers.
Yes. So the key person in all of this is actually the interior minister. He's a guy called Bruno Retailleau. And Retailleau claims that he was misled about the presence of Le Maire in the government. He said that he met with Lecornu on Sunday and that Lecornu never mentioned to him that Le Maire was going to be reappointed to the government and that he would never have joined if he'd known. And then when the 18 names were announced, he suddenly realized, and it was Retailleau's involvement then that started to unravel the whole thing.
So, Mario, let me get this right then. The budget issue, which is what has stymied all the last few previous prime ministers, Lecornu never even got to that.
Well, he had sort of a plan. He had made concessions already, trying to solidify support from the Conservatives and extending some tiny olive branches to the Socialists, but that obviously wasn't allowed to run its course. The government collapsed before then. You should know, there is some breaking news as we speak. The Élysée has let it known that Macron has tasked Lecornu to try once again, for the next couple of days, to find a compromise with political parties. So it's kind of extending this government which is already on life support. It's really like uncharted territory, I must say. Okay,
Tristan, you're now going to have to interpret this in real time because Marion was just breaking that news to both of us. Me as an amateur, you as a professional. So does this mean Lecornu is sort of unresigned or reappointed?
Oh, I'm trying to get my head around this. So
he's even taking his glasses off. That's how much thinking.
That's
how much thinking is going.
So, I mean, officially, the ministers who were appointed last night stay in position until a new government is formed, and their role is to sort of handle the day-to-day workings of government. But I mean, I guess
sounds like one of the Brunos will have to go though to make that work.
I mean, Bruno Le Maire surely can't stay. But I mean, I can't get my head around it. I mean, everyone was thinking today that basically Macron would probably have to dissolve parliament and call new elections. But it's who is it who said insanity is trying the same thing over and over again?
I think it's always attributed to Einstein, but then it's one of these quotes that Anyway, we'll get our elves to work that
Because
out.
what Macron is doing now is essentially if he tries to get Lecornu to form another government, he'll be trying for the 1, 2, 3, fourth time to the same thing and hoping for a different result, and that seems like a tall order.
We don't have all the details now, but my understanding is maybe is keeping the government as is, like the newly appointed one, in caretaking mode, and kind of asking them to find a compromise. But again, like this is like really kind of just breaking, so trying to interpret as you do here.
My guess would be it's going back to where we started this conversation. It was a personnel issue rather than a policy issue. I mean, that policy issue still remains and is going to be just as tricky when they get to it as previous prime ministers have found it. But actually, Macron presumably thinks you can make some tweaks to the lineup of the cabinet, and actually this problem, this current one, goes away.
I think that's probably some disillusionment on his part, because there are deep policy issues going on here, and the question of how you dig France out of this financial hole, and the various solutions available to any government to try and solve the financial issues are getting fewer and fewer with every passing day. So, you know, if you ask people on the far left or the far right, or even just on the main left-wing bloc, if this is a personnel issue or a policy issue, they would tell you it is all of the above.
I mean, and Tristan, basically the policy issue we're talking about here is that France's public finances, they spend too much, then they raise in taxes. There's limits to how much they can borrow because the international markets will only lend them so much, and so there's going to have to be some spending cuts somewhere, and no one can agree where they're going to be.
Yes, that's right. And the French borrowing rate spiked today. The euro went down, and the clock is ticking because they have to appoint a new government which is coherent enough to get through to the end of the year to actually institute a new budget for 2026. And at the moment, that's looking very challenging.
And Marion, in terms of the other parties then, or the other blocs in the National Assembly, I mean, how are they handling all of this today? Because, of course, they bear some responsibility for the gridlock as well.
Yes, of course. But at the end of the day, I mean, they can always say that it's Macron's. The one thing is for sure, I mean, if they're entering a new round of negotiations, it's going to be a very tough sell for both the moderate left and the moderate right, because what do they have to gain to extend like some sort of lifeline to Macron right now? Let's not forget that we have local elections in March. Like everyone is, trying to solidify its base here. And it's hard to see how, if Lecornu failed during the last 4 weeks, is going to succeed in just 2 days.
And also, Marion, it does sound like Macron is really resisting this idea of new elections for the assembly.
Yes, because his polling numbers are just appalling. Like currently, the polling shows the National Rally to be way ahead in a potential election. Macron's party is trailing third behind the left, which is polling second. So any call for a fresh election would likely result in his ranks being crushed in the National Assembly.
Of course, Tristan, the other election Macron could call would be his own position as president. Talk us through the pros and cons of that happening.
Well, yes.
Both from his point of view and from France's point of view.
Yes. So no French president in the Fifth Republic has ever resigned from office. One president died in office, but it's never happened before. Macron has always said that he will serve through to the end of his second term in 2027. And there is no sign of him bowing to pressure from left and right to do that, which is, I mean, there is huge pressure on him at this point to step aside. I mean, he's an unpredictable guy. He likes to do things that you don't expect. So he may do something like this, but I mean, it's never happened before. I would say that one of the interesting conspiracy theories doing the round at the moment, especially apparently in his own party, is that what's happening right now, according to the conspiracy theory, is that Macron is engineering a situation in which the far right would come to power, and that he would then either resign or step down in 2027, which is when his term ends. And then he would want to challenge them in the next election in 2032 because he believes that that would be his best chance for a comeback. Now, I don't know if there's any truth in that. I wonder what Marion thinks.
Yeah, we've actually written that up this morning in Playbook, our flagship political newsletter, and this was coming from someone from his own party. So that theory is making the rounds within Macron's troops themselves.
But I suppose one thing that might put Macron off doing something really bold, and that would be very bold, is that actually the last time he did something bold, it was calling early elections for the National Assembly, which he didn't need to do, and which is what has got France into this gridlocked political situation in the first place.
Yes, that was obviously in hindsight a disastrous move that nobody is really trying to defend today. It would be even worse, politically speaking, for him now. But he's just running out of options. He only has bad options ahead of him.
There's always a temptation to think in French political circles that Macron is a kind of four-dimensional chess player, and that everyone's trying to work out what his move is. But sometimes it's proved that actually he's just kind of floundering around trying to find his way like the rest of us.
Because we're all human beings and can only think in 3 dimensions. And Tristan, just in terms of like having observed all this stuff for decades now, I mean, is this completely uncharted territory? Is this unprecedented? Or actually, is it just a sort of more extreme kind of stuff of the same genre?
So France is not Italy. So, Italy is known for, less so these days under Meloni, but in the past, it's been a country where there's this huge, massive, rapid turnover of governments. France is not traditionally that way. So I think we are in uncharted territory, certainly because of the regularity with which governments are falling, but overall because it's leading to a place where it looks like the favorites to take power are the far right, and that's never happened before. So if Emmanuel Macron turns out to have been the president that has opened the door to government for the far right, then that is without doubt uncharted territory.
And Marion, just last question for you. I mean, I've covered a lot of news stories in France, but I've never been there on a day when there's been a proper political crisis. How does it actually just play out on the ground? I mean, I know exactly how it would be happening in the UK. There'd be people scurrying around Parliament in all the corridors. You'd have a load of journalists out on the patch of grass outside Parliament. You'd maybe have a bunch of people in Downing Street waiting for the Prime Minister to come out and do something at a lectern. Just obviously the French system's quite different. Like what does it feel like on a day like this?
Yeah, it's slightly all over the place, obviously. As I was crisscrossing Paris this morning for reporting, I could see journalists heading from one headquarters to another, trying to get hold of, MPs and top party officials. It was a weird vibe because after this morning's announcement that people weren't expecting, honestly, now people are just kind of waiting for Macron's next move because everyone is like, what now? I mean, what can you do after that? Like it's, as one top advisor to Marine Le Pen was telling me today, it's a bit of a change of nature, even like for the ongoing crisis, like having a government full less than 24 hours after being appointed is definitely feels like new, even in the current territory.
Right, Marion, I will let you get back to dashing around Paris. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Tristan, just explain to newscasters what they hear when they download the global story, because it's a different way of doing the news from how we do it.
Yes. Oh, thank you for asking. So it's more of a kind of narrative podcast, so where we're telling a kind of blow by blow story. There's a lot of chronology, so we'll go back to the beginning of a story, sometimes maybe even 20 years ago, and work forward to the current day, so that our listeners can understand context and a bit of story that's quite highly produced, and stories about the world and the United States and how the two interact with each other.
What I love about it, and I don't mean this is going to sound like a slightly odd thing to say, but like you don't know what you're going to get each day, but in a good way.
I'm glad to hear it. That's what we're aiming for.
Tristan, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. It was great.